Hello, everyone. Welcome to our November virtual random review. I'm Connie Georgiou. Deborah Goldenberg and I coordinate random review for Friends of the Library, which sponsors this event. Deborah, how about turning on your camera and saying hello to the audience?
Hi, everyone. Welcome, and we're really glad to have you join us. I hope you enjoy the review. See you at the end.
I'd like to welcome the members of Congregation Shir Tikva who are with us today, and a very special welcome to my oldest friend from kindergarten in New Jersey. Hi, Sarah. Thank you all for joining us today. I wish I could greet you in person, but that'll just have to wait till things change. I have a few operational details. The GoToWebinar program works well for most people, but if you're having technical difficulties, you can type a question in the question box of your GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll try to help you out. But if your issues can't be resolved, don't worry. This program is being recorded, and you can access it to watch in about a week or 10 days. If you have a question for our reviewer, please type it in the question box, and she'll try to answer at least most of these questions at the end of her talk. After the review, you'll receive a follow-up email, which will include links you can use to access the recording of this random review, register for future reviews, and sign up for our mailing list to receive monthly random review information. At the Random Review webpage, you'll also find a list of library books related to today's topic. This book list was created by our volunteer, Gail Gerdeman, and it's similar to the book cart we've had at our live book reviews sometime in the past. You'll also be able to connect to our Friends of the Library website, where you can join the Friends if you'd like. In addition to supporting Random Review, Friends of the Library provides funding for all of the programs that aren't in the library budget. For example, the very popular summer reading programs and copies of books for book clubs. Memberships and donations support these programs, and they're especially helpful now, as you can imagine, when book sales aren't possible. Although we have no book sales scheduled for this year, we are planning a virtual readathon fundraising event on February 27th in place of the usual big book sale. So stay tuned for details. And now I'd like to say thank you to our local sponsors. Grassroots Books and Music, which helps provide books for our reviewers and gives us great publicity. Northwest Graphic Imaging, who designed our annual poster, and the Corvallis Gazette-Times, and especially reporter Jim Day. They've been very supportive of our program and provide us excellent publicity. And a very big thank you to the best library, and especially librarians Bonnie Brzozowski and Mike Hansen, who host these webinars and have been instrumental in making the Random Review program possible this year. Bonnie's hosting us today, and she'll be fielding your questions later in the program. Bonnie, would you like to turn on your webcam and make an appearance?
Hi, everybody. I'm really looking forward to going through the questions later, and we're going to have a great review. Thanks for being here.
Next month's Random Review will be at the usual time again, the second Wednesday of the month, December 9th. That review will be a special 90-minute panel discussion of One Long River of Song by Brian Doyle from noon to 1:30. The panelists will be David James Duncan, David Grube, and Kathleen Dean Moore. And now I'd like to ask the very same David Grube, a member of our Random Review Selection Committee and a frequent random reviewer himself, to join me on the screen and introduce today's speaker. And I'll say goodbye for now, and I'll see you later.
Good afternoon. I'm really excited about this random review for many, many reasons. But first of all, I want to thank Victoria Fridley. She brought the book to our attention in the committee last June. And as for those of you who've read the book, it's quite an extraordinary and remarkable book for many reasons, and particularly in its construction. It's a hard book to explain, but she was so passionate about it that we all agreed that we should have this book. And then I said, I know a remarkable reviewer, and we were able to have Rabbi Ariel Stone come today virtually with us to explore this book with us. Rabbi Stone was born in Jacksonville and raised in Orlando, Florida. I asked her why she wanted to become a rabbi, and she said, end quote, "In high school, I was very active in my synagogue community. And by the time I was leaving for college, I knew I wanted to be a rabbi just like my rabbi. The interview committee at the rabbinical school to which I applied did not accept me. So I spent 2 years shadowing my rabbi and working in that shul, which is a Jewish word, she tells me, for synagogue. And when I reapplied, I was accepted." Rabbi Stone got her BA in political science with an emphasis on international studies from Emory University. She got her master's degree in Hebrew letters from Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, and received her doctorate of Jewish studies from Spertus Institute in Chicago. Since 2002, she has served as the spiritual leader of Congregation Shir Tikva in Portland, a congregation that she organized. But she's also taught at Oregon State University here in Corvallis in the late Marcus Borg's religion classes, as well as Portland State and Willamette. She's the very first American rabbi to lead a congregation in the former Soviet Union, and the first progressive rabbi to serve the Jewish community of the Ukraine. She's a founder of the Portland Interfaith Clergy Resistance and was awarded the City of Portland's Human Rights Commission Emily G. Gottfried Lifetime Achievement Award 2 years ago. She has twice been president of the Oregon Board of Rabbis. She's the author of a couple books. One of the books is called Because All Is One. I was looking at critiques online about this book, and my favorite one was a person who was upset because the margins were too small and they couldn't get all of their notes and thoughts written down. She was originally went to Israel in 1987 and later lived there for 3 years when she was studying at the Mendel Institute, and that was during the Second Intifada. She says that she's been to Israel maybe 30 or 40 times, leading groups of children and adults, as well as having lived there. If there's one word that I could say about Rabbi Stone, it is that she is a seeker. She is seeking justice. She's a seeker for wisdom and new information. And I am excited that she's going to review this book today for us, A Paragon by Colum McCann. Rabbi Stone, thank you for doing this.
Oh, it's my great pleasure. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm just sorry that I can't be there in person to give you a great big hug.
Me too.
But it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm very grateful for having been asked. I hope I can do Dr. Grube proud, since he was the one who suggested me. I really do feel that it's an honor and a privilege to be able to share my experience of Colum McCann's book. And it intersects so utterly with my own experience that it's just going to be hard for me to limit myself to the time we have. So please do ask questions. Please don't be surprised when I am not able to get to everything that is important to know about this book and what it evokes. I'd just like to start by saying something about birds. First of all, they're on the cover of the book. Secondly, I don't know if you've thought about Emily Dickinson's poem lately, but for me, I find the birds on my balcony to be such an important thing for me on a regular basis. I I know that people are adopting pets. For me, it's feeding the birds. To see the birds come in, to be reassured that they're still there, it's meant a lot in ways you wouldn't have expected until you were locked down and you saw this beacon of hope from elsewhere. The bluebird of happiness, the carrier pigeon, all the ways in which birds symbolize to us the overcoming of barriers and the possibility of hope. And that brings me to say something about hope, which I also think is important for our consideration of a paragon. Hope is not just a thing with feathers. Hope is a discipline. Hope takes regular work, just like anything else, if it's going to hold us up and help us to hold each other up. One of the things that has been marked about this time of coronavirus has been the toll that it has taken on our connectivity to each other as human beings. I became interested in the quality of empathy, whether it really is attenuated by a screen. What are the things that have an impact on our ability to have a capacity for empathy, to be able to feel someone else's pleasure or pain? Research on the human capacity for empathy has been carried out just down the road at the University of Oregon by psychologist Paul Slovic. He found that it's hard for us to care about the many people whose suffering is displayed for us through the media. With respect to the theology of Bette Midler in the song From a Distance, we do need close-up exposure if we are to have a chance to overcome the psychic numbing that shields us from the full horror of the scale of suffering that we would otherwise have crashing in upon us and upon our hearts. The book we're gathered to consider today is called A Paragon. The title refers to a polygon with a countably infinite number of sides. This seems appropriate, perhaps beyond the author's intent. In my own experience of what Israelis have long called the situation involving Israelis and Palestinians, there are as many sides as there are human beings at the very least. And no doubt there are many sides to the author's own situation at the moment, as he has been accused by a fellow author of sexual assault. Others protesting his nomination to the Booker Prize long list declare that the story is not his to tell. For me, I found his telling to be excellent, not least because of the structure of the book. It's fortunate that In a Paragon inspires us to consider many more sides of our subject for today. My people have struggled, for example, with the question of whether it's appropriate to listen to the music of Wagner because of the artist's anti-Semitism and the Nazis' love of his music. Can one admire an artist's work if the artist is not admirable? Hardly any of us are. So many sides to consider in any human issue. The title of Paragon itself prompts the question of whether it's appropriate to compare the contemplation of a geometric figure, a cool, balanced, scientific construction, with the generational emotional trauma of those whose lives are destroyed in what seems, at the least, an entirely unbalanced disaster of cynical politicians, rapacious third-party arms dealers, and human beings who want simply to be left alone, to have families, to do good work, and to love their children. I'm grateful to Colum McCann for taking on this task of empathy and for reminding us that it is impossible to tell a story accurately from only one point of view. Let's consider two aspects of how McCann does it. First, the structure of the book. 499 chapters of varying length, some only a sentence or a paragraph long, count up to the number 500. the presentation of the bereaved Rami speaking to another room full of audience. A short chapter numbered 1001, one long sentence describing those who gather to listen. Then number 500 again, and this time it's Bassam presenting the story of his bereavement. Then another 499 chapters, varying between a word, a sentence, a paragraph in length. Second, 3 primary metaphors. Consider, if you will, the Dead Sea. It exists at the absolutely most inhospitable part of the entire region, way below sea level, an area which in ancient tradition was blasted from being a fertile plain to being a place where nothing would ever grow again except for some nasty scrub. A body of water that can't be drunk, that can't support life at all. It is said in parable form about the Dead Sea that one should compare it to the Sea of Galilee north of it. What's the difference between those two bodies of water? The Sea of Galilee is a glorious, ever refreshed, huge amount of fresh water. And it flows into the Jordan River, which then flows south until it reaches the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea, which takes in but does not offer anything out of itself. And so the parable, the Sea of Galilee, which lives because it gives, the Dead Sea, which is dead because it only receives. The Dead Sea is very large, very icky consistency. If you try to get into it, you will float like a cork, and the water will feel like hot mineral oil that's been oversalted. It's supposedly good for the skin, but it's certainly not good for anything to be immersed in it for very long. And if you've read the book, you've seen the terrible pilgrimage of the theology student who was sure that something special was going to happen if only he could explore the Dead Sea sufficiently. And perhaps you also remember the artist who left a dress in the water for a little while. And when it was pulled up again, it was entirely covered with a substance that made it so heavy that it broke apart. For those of us who are familiar with the Middle East, that which holds and accretes so heavily until it breaks the bearer is history. Perhaps that's also what held down that dove that wouldn't fly as the tightrope walker made his way across the valley to the old city of Jerusalem. Curious, isn't it, that Petit, who had a rather larger part of Let the Great World Spin, is back again. This time in a gesture that feels well-intended, but certainly is not going to do any more to bring peace to the area than any of the other well-intended one-off gestures of well-meaning people. And perhaps that's what's so funny about the dove, that probably was actually a pigeon that wouldn't leave his hand as he was trying to get it to fly and be a symbol of the soaring nature of hope. Hope doesn't soar in the Middle East. It hops along, refuses to move, goes back the other direction irritated because you got it out of bed too early. Refuses to become a poem. And I'd also like to just take one moment to ask you to consider the musical pieces that are mentioned by McCann. John Cage's 433, absolute silence held by the musicians as a form of hearing. Or the Requiem in Theresienstadt, the piano with no legs, the performers who were sent to their deaths after making this beautiful music. And the awkward way in which the Holocaust inserts itself into any discussion of Israel. Because massacres are always awkward. And what does it mean when John Cage again arranges for a piece of music that's supposed to last 639 years? And is that music? And is that how long it's going to take for us to find a solution to the matzav, the situation in the Middle East? And let's focus in now on the book-long metaphor of birds. There are so many metaphors: soup left boiling, a candy bracelet, statues and gardens and keys, an embarrassment of riches, all these metaphors. Perhaps the abundance itself tells us something about the essential humanity of a conflict reduced over and over again by simplistic narratives to just a few sides, when it's truly in a paragon of perspectives. So why not have a paragon of metaphors? But let's talk about the birds for a moment. The capture and tagging of a bird in its migration. The ancient land of Canaan, now called Israel and Palestine, is blessed to be a place overflown by many millions of birds in their yearly migrations between north and south. The truth that birds overfly all borders and boundaries, is that freedom? Or does it depend on where they land? And that they are able to land? On the other hand, all the tiny little birds that are cooked and eaten, not only by Mitterrand for his last meal, but reflected as well in the 4 and 20 blackbirds baked in a pie for the king, or the ongoing slaughter of songbirds in different places, which see them as a delicacy. And I go back to Emily Dickinson's "Hope is the thing with feathers." Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. And sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that kept so many warm. The birds on my balcony do keep me warm when I hear them chirping away. And it's a terrible gale that Palestinians and Israelis both suffer, have been suffering for too many generations now. And the little birds still fly and still sing and still challenge us to continue to believe that hope, similarly delicate, can continue to warm us. We've heard too much about the Middle East to be able to know it, have absorbed too many narratives from media, both social and antisocial. McCann offers us a window far too complicated for a news report, a welcome opportunity to experience the life of a particular place as if we were there. To me, that's what the short chapters do. They mirror my own sense of how a human being thinks and experiences life and makes sense of it. Short moments, always interrupted by some other thought, or something happens, or one free associates, and then one looks up and sees a bird flying by and thinks, yeah, and that reminds me of some other aspect of this thing I'm trying to get my head around. So, bird's eye view, you can't see them from here, but this is where 8.8 million Israelis and 4.5 million Palestinians live. Although you may imagine it as a land of heat and sun, sometimes the people who live here are delighted by a snowstorm. And if you look very carefully, In the middle, just to the left, you can see the dome of the rock, that golden dome. And just before it, you can see a bit of tan, which actually is the walls of the old city. This view from the south of a Jerusalem snowstorm. This is Jerusalem, beloved culturally and for centuries upon centuries, also religiously, by the people of Bassam and Rami. There are things all families love. Playing in the snow on the Tayelet, as this Arab family is doing. Or having dinner together. This is actually my family at a family Seder. Once upon a time, Jews and Arabs lived close together. I love this photo because it shows you two people who are touching each other. They are speaking to each other. They are sharing a moment in a way which is no longer possible since this wall was built. This is the separation wall. Israelis and Palestinians used to share Hebrew, some Arabic, especially the Arabic slang, which is so much juicier than Hebrew slang. The process of separation, which ended with this wall, has been a long time coming. People have been referring to the situation since Intifada #1 began in 1987. And as Dr. Grube mentioned, I also was living in Israel during Intifada #2, which started in 2001. This was what I risked if I got on a bus in Jerusalem at that time. The extended story that McCann tells about slingshots deserves as well an illumination. There are people who are still as good at it, and there are people who still have to use it. And in South Tel Aviv, and on the separation wall as well, you can often see written in many languages, including English, there will be no justice until there is peace. Who is caught up in all of this? Well, among other people, an old friend of mine whose son served like all always do, the Israeli army. Went in for 3 years. I used to send chocolate chip cookies. Yes, that's me with darker hair and a dog. That's him come for Shabbat dinner on a Friday night, young and innocent and in no way aware of what he's going to be asked to do. In his own way, caught up, not murdered, but caught up just as innocently in the ongoing violence that claim these two beautiful girls and so many others. Small birds get lost and die. That damn dove just won't take flight. And it was probably a pigeon anyway. Let's talk about hope. The bereaved parents circle that Rami and Bassam both became involved in is a real thing. And I met Rami when I attended a presentation, Bassam wasn't there, in Jerusalem. Families of bereaved parents who find each other in a common bereavement and find that bereavement to be stronger. The walls that they have been taught separate them. In my tradition, there's one comparison between things that are in the act. And to say the word law, which means it's not as if I'm comparing in between. But the separation wall between Rami and Bassam, so that Bassam didn't know any Hebrew until he went to jail, and Rami didn't know any Arabic until he it reminds me a little bit of the way people are letting the Zoom screens come to be a wall between us. It's not necessary. And if we're going to survive a long, cold winter of isolation and lockdown, it's time we started looking for the connections we have rather than bemoan our Zoom links. Even like Shlomo Avineri, who is like Rami's father-in-law, someone like him who sees the damage way in advance, who says, stop now, who says, don't let it go any further. Before the Intifada, an author said, Amos Oz, an Israeli author, was already warning us, I should say. People like Shlomo Avineri, who used to be absolutely anathema establishment and are seen as precursors of every creative idea. Extra hopeful oil, by the way, never mind extra virgin, I hope you get the joke, is created by a consortium that's trying to find positive ways forward to overcome the walls of not knowing each other well anymore, the walls of not speaking each language, fear, being willing to believe in the worst of another person because you don't know them. But if you make olive oil together, you begin to rebuild all that social capital that we squandered. The next thing I'll show you, moment that took place in the Waldorf School in the West Bank. It's run by Manar and Milad Voskarichin, who are an amazing couple. And I'm going to see if I can play this for you. My apologies in advance if you can't hear. That, did I do that right? Yes. That is Manar singing in Arabic. Manar with a Waldorf kindergarten in the West Bank in order to help young children overcome trauma that they're experiencing. Manar, who refuse to become radicalized toward hatred by their anger, instead are looking to heal their anger through love and through helping children overcome what otherwise would be a pipeline from trauma to terrorism. It takes more courage and more discipline to maintain that kind of hope than it does to walk across the valley of Gehinnom in Jerusalem. It takes more understanding part, demands more willingness to go beyond simple narratives. There are efforts, by the way, on the other side. There's a school called Hand in Hand in Israel, which has created now, I believe they're up to 8 schools that do bilingual Arab-Jewish education, which is also bicultural and has 2 teachers in every classroom. These kind of things you don't hear about because the politicians drive the media. but there is so much more complexity to the story. And that is what I believe McCann has done such a terrific job of sharing with us. In the scattershot nature of the structure of the book, going back and forth between perspectives, we're reminded that the only way not to be knocked off balance is to remind yourself of the opposite perspective every time you begin to think you have a handle on it. In my tradition, we are warned that you never really understand anything, the full truth of anything. And what's beautiful to me about McCann's book in that way is the fact that the exact middle of the book, which we might call the apex or the nadir or some other focusing term, is nothing other than a group of people listening. It is not a conclusion. It is not, if it were an apex, you'd expect to have the best view, right, from the top of the mountain we've climbed. But that's not it at all. At the middle of the book, where are you? You're listening. The challenge for all of us is to maintain an apeirogon approach to everything in life. None of us can stand where a bereaved parent stands, unless we are ourselves bereaved, God forbid, of a child. At least in Jewish tradition, one's child is very clearly one's immortality, the one who's supposed to outlive you and remember you. The lesson of empathy that Colum McCann offers us, I believe, in Apeirogon is how we can carry on with a meaning which doesn't have to be definitive of the truth. Neither Bassam know anything other than the bumper sticker on Rami's motorcycle, which beautifully in Hebrew, this will not be ended until we talk. Hate thrives to each other. I remember when the separation wall was being built, and we were, sorry, I was just getting a note about my connection, but I'll check in the chat and see whether there's any issue. No issue I can see. Walls mean that we can't communicate. When the separation wall was being built, I remember asking an older Israeli who's a cousin of mine what he thought about the wall. And he snorted and said, if we spent as much money on education, we wouldn't need it. Everybody else in Israel that I had talked to was thrilled that it was probably going to cut back on the number of bus bombings and other bombings, such as the one that killed Smadal. If we just put that much money in education, we wouldn't need a wall. I believe that Colum McCann is asking us, reaching out to us through the nature of the book being like the way we actually take in information, constantly being interrupted, constantly associating with things constantly happening that we need to assimilate and bring into our perspective. McCann, I believe, through this structure is telling us, first of all, to take everything in and to let everything balance everything else. And realize that learning is a continual process. We ourselves being asked by Bassam and Rami to witness their lives the way they've become witness of their children's. When we read Apeirogon, if we let it teach us about the partial nature of comprehension, the ongoing nature, it seems that we might come around to this insight that to understand something is as much a discipline of applying oneself, of staying open to many different contradictory and conflicting moments, as hope itself is a discipline. To get back to the birds and to finish with them, I loved chapter 470 on page 200, and I'd like to finish with that thought. The Conference of the Birds was written in Persian at the end of the 12th century. When the last birds, 30 of them, finally get to the home of the Simorgh, exhausted, they gaze into a lake. Instead of meeting the mythical creature they've been searching for, they find only their own reflections. It seems, at the end, that hope is not the thing with feathers. The thing with feathers is us. For your consideration. Hi.
That was really lovely, Rabbi Stone. Are you finished up? I just want to make sure. Are we okay for
I'm
questions
done.
now?
I'm
Great.
done.
Okay.
I like to end kind of on a note with
I
the other
love
foot
it.
not dropping yet.
Yeah, no, I love it. I haven't received any questions so far, so I just want to open it
cool.
up to all the attendees. This is your chance to provide a comment or a question or anything you'd like to Rabbi Stone. Please just write it in your question box, and we'll stand by in a few minutes and see if we get some questions. I'm not seeing anything yet.
I've left them speechless.
I know, apparently. Okay, let's why don't, since we're, oh, here we go. We got a thank you so much. Thank you for the perspective. Really appreciate it. And while we wait to see if we get any more questions, oh, and here we've got a raised hand. A few people have their hand raised. Just go ahead and just type your question in. There's not an easy way for me to call on people. Okay, here's a good question, Rabbi Stone. How does fear drive all these behaviors?
Well, yikes, it's such an important thing. First of all, fear drives fear and the reaction to, after all, it's a very human thing, right? We all do fight, we all want to stay alive. Fear is a constant companion if you live in a stressful environment. One of the most important things you do, though, is recognize that being afraid doesn't have to be the driver of your acts. Right? They say courage is not the absence of fear. It's recognizing, okay, I'm afraid, and then you go ahead and you do the right thing anyway. That I think is true in everybody's life. If you look at what Rami and Bassam are doing, they may be less driven by fear because they're being driven by grief. Grief can overcome fear. But when you look at the accumulation of what the wall has enhanced, not created, but enhanced, is the capacity for fear, because it goes hand in hand with the lack of familiarity, right? If you turn on the light when you look under the bed, you're probably not going to see a monster, right? But if the light is out and it's the middle of the night and you've let your imagination go, there may be a monster under there. You can't tell. So the less we know, the more frightened we are. I have relatives who have been thoroughly disgusted with Israeli politics because they were hoping that the Jewish state would uphold Jewish ethics, and what they've discovered is that Jews are people, and politics corrupts and power corrupts, and Jews are like anybody else, and really sorry, but we're not going to do a better job than anybody else just because we have a state and we should know better because our tradition is that once you've been abused, you should never abuse anybody else. And here we are out of fear for our own lives, doing things we would never want done to us. It's a travesty of Jewish ethics. Certainly fear drives fear for one's own safety and fear for the people one loves.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. We have another question that came in. Do you see parallels between the divide in the US and in Israel?
Wow. So Ken uses a metaphor and shows you how that intertwined. I guess it's really the next thing to ask, what is the next level, right? What other societies? He brings up Ireland, right? And the conflict in Northern Ireland. It drives me crazy when people say, well, you know, if you could do that, then you could do this. But maybe, you know, every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. The United States is a family that's also on its own way. I think, though, probably that's the impetus for the question is, how much do you know about the other side, right? At the same time, one of the things we've struggled with in Israel is there's a place to say that there are human beings on both sides, but there are also people who are attempting to manipulate. There are also psychopaths. There are also scary bad people on both sides. And so one of the traps is to not know which is which. I was talking to somebody yesterday about, unfortunately, there are people who are believing never believe one media source, right? If we learned one thing from McCann's book, it's everything's in a paragon. So if you've heard things that make you think downtown Portland is burning up, or that young people are out there rioting every night, and that property damage has just trashed downtown Portland, I'm here to tell you that you need to consider the other countably infinite number of sides to that story as well, right? It's an entirely different topic, but what it has in common is you don't know. There's a paragon of perspectives, and you don't know the truth from a distance. So don't go judging and don't go defining from a distance. It's difficult, right? We're told, you know, we're on a global scale. We can learn so much through the internet. We can find out about things all over the world. No, we can't. We can find out second and third and fourth hand from people who do have their biases and people who are trying to tell a story. And anytime you tell a story, you're not telling another story. There's a reason why people make the play on words. When you call it history, that's just his story. What is her story? What is their story? So yeah, in that way, I think you can take that same concept of the apeirogon, bring it with you. If you can wrap your head around that idea, I have a mathematician friend who's been trying to explain it to me. Take it with you. Use it as a prism to refract the light you think you're getting from anything you're hearing about that has to do with more than one human being, and watch the light go in a million different directions the way it does through a prism. And then tell me who's right and what's the truth.
Wow, that's a great metaphor. I like that a lot. One of the participants is actually asking about whether or not this will be recorded. Yes, this is being recorded. It will be emailed to every single person who registered, even if they didn't attend. The video link will be directly registered or sent to who registered, and then it will also be posted to the website, the Random Review website, which you'll receive a link to as well in your follow-up email. And then we did get another great question. It's a juicy one. To risk bringing this to American politics, what is your take on American Jews not voting for Trump, given his support for Israel? An article I read mentioned or used a quote that said American Jews should be ashamed for having done this.
So first of all, if you believe that the occupation is immoral, as I do, as 50% of Israelis do, Israeli politics is incredibly divided. If you believe the occupation is immoral and it should end, then you don't vote for Netanyahu if you're there, and you don't vote for Trump if you're here. If you care about, and secondly, Jews, this is a thing that is very dangerous. Jews really are afraid of this. When we start being compared, the outgoing president of the United States has gone so far as to say that Israel is our country if we're American Jews. That's egregious, anti-Semitic, and has been the first building block in Jews being massacred, slaughtered, and forced to emigrate. What's the word I want? Deported, because they're considered to not be loyal subjects of the land in which they live. Jews are not Israelis. Many Israelis are not Jews. Jews have lived in exile from that homeland for 2,000 years. If we hadn't, we wouldn't have a group of people who moved in after we left saying, wait a minute, we live here now. What do you mean you want to come back? Which is really the heart of where this whole problem starts. As Amos Oz put it, we're going to have to learn how to have an amicable divorce and split a small apartment. It's not a huge space. But for there to be an expectation that Jews would be single issue voters who would vote based on what's good for Israel. And secondly, that anybody would believe, this is just me talking now, but me as a rabbi who believes that Judaism is about the ethics of the prophets, who say that unless you care for the widowed, the poor, the orphan, then you're going straight to hell and so is your society. The outgoing president of the United States has been disastrously catastrophic for human beings. There are 500 and more children who've been separated from their parents for no reason that's legal. Nothing Jewish about that. Jews who live in the United States are loyal to the United States. We want to see our tax dollars going to uphold the kind of society we want to build and we want to live in. But if I lived in Israel, I'd be demonstrating against Netanyahu. And I do donate to organizations that are looking to build a more just society in Israel because Israel is dear to me. I have family there. I love being there. I'm spiritually at home there. I've considered moving there to live. But yeah, I want to see the Jewish state become a beacon of Jewish values. And the occupation is not that. And everybody knows that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. We have another question. If listening and understanding are a route to the resolution of conflict, it seems the truth is key to that understanding. Now, however, we're plagued with non-truths. How do we get there to the truth when bad guys are focused on spewing untruth?
So Barack Obama recently called it truth decay. Have you heard that one yet? I actually love that. He said that one election is not going to reverse the consequences of truth decay in this country. And he's absolutely right. Unless we begin to see larger perspectives, unless we're able to see historical currents, unless we're able to think critically and in a sophisticated manner that has something to do with the good of all and not the good of one, we're going to continue to be divided and we're going to continue to see truth decay. Only when causes for cynicism and despair are removed through real good faith building of relationships, only then are we going to reach some kind of common ground on which we might begin to trust each other again. Yeah, it's simplistic to blame it on Reagan or on Nixon. There have been lots of things to be depressed about in this country all the way back. There's things about human nature. You know, I'm a rabbi. I can bring it all the way back to the book of Genesis. Go look at what God said right before sending the flood. God looks at all of human creation and says, oh my God, this sucks. This is awful. These people are awful. All they do is kill each other and lie to each other. They're awful. So God destroys the world and starts over. and then afterward sees nothing's really changed. Human nature is what it is. So in Jewish tradition, there's actually this lovely, lovely, hopeful message, which I'd like to leave you with, which is this. Human beings don't deserve to exist. We are, as a group, we are so awful. Look what we've done to the planet. Look what we do to each other. Look at how we don't even manage to have empathy for all the terrible things that we do or let happen. So we don't have any right to exist. Why do we exist? So the legend is that there are 36 absolutely righteous people living in the world at any one moment. A little bit like the 10 that if they'd been in Sodom and Gomorrah, Abraham would have convinced God not to kill, the innocent along with the guilty. There are 36 righteous people living in the world at all times. Now, if you think you're one of them, you're wrong, because the definition of a truly righteous person is that they're humble, among other things. They also do righteous things, but it becomes a really lovely way to live your life, to keep your eyes out for, have you ever met a truly righteous person? And might it be true that 36 absolutely righteous anonymous people living in the world at all times is what has convinced God to let the rest of us continue to exist and continue to try to do better. And if we can find one of them to follow, maybe they do have that kind of impact. Maybe that's the saving grace.
That's great.
Yeah.
That was all the questions we had. Can I invite Connie? Yeah, Connie, David, do you want to come on? Deborah, if you want to. Everybody just come on for a minute and say goodbye.
It was a pleasure to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
I'd like to thank you very, very much, Rabbi Ariel, for that, your very insightful review and such a lively and thoughtful discussion. And we'll say goodbye to everybody now, and we'll see you next time.
Yes, hope to see you next month.
Be well, stay safe.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good afternoon.